It's good to be with you this morning. I had the pleasure of delivering the second of my men's lectures on American populism and Unitarian Universalism last night from this pulpit. And I also had the pleasure of being a member of this congregation from 1998 through 2006 when I graduated from seminary. This pulpit's actually the first place I ever preached a homily from way back in 2000. So it's good to be with you all again in a place that feels a little bit like home. This morning, I suspect that the recent legislation passed in Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio is on so many of your hearts. It is on mine. We live in a moment where democratic values are under assault throughout the globe. Normally, when I preach, I address my sermon to the events of the hour. However, last night I gave an hour and 20-minute lecture, and this morning I did not have the energy to rewrite my text. So I hope you will forgive me when I offer you a sermon on friendship and I hope you will listen to its principal message. Friendship is one of the most powerful forces in human life, and friendship can provide a base for so much of the work for justice that needs to be done. So with that, two bodies, one heart. The image of an elderly Emerson, perhaps resting in dusty sunlight on an overstuffed armchair, asking his wife, Lydian, "What was the name of my best friend?" is moving. It suggests that Thoreau's names faded long before the feelings his memory evoked. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau are not exactly the type of people I usually think of when I think of friends. Thoreau, the archetypal nonconformist, sought to live in the woods by Walden Pond to prove his independence. His classic text opens, "I lived alone in the woods a mile from any neighbor, in a house I built myself, and earned my living by the labor of my hands only. I lived there 2 years and 2 months. At present, I am a sojourner in civilized life again." For Thoreau, solitary life was permanent, while life amongst his human fellows was but a sojourn, a temporary condition. Emerson was quite skeptical about the social dimensions of human life. In his essay, Self-Reliance, he claimed, "Society everywhere is a conspiracy against every one of its members." He believed that self-discovery, the task of awakening knowledge of the self, belonged to the individual, not the community. When he was invited to join the utopian community of Brook Farm, Emerson responded that he was unwilling to give the community the task of my emancipation, which I ought to take on myself. Yet, both these men sought out the company of others. Emerson gathered around him a circle of poets and preachers, writers, and intellectuals whose friendships have become legendary. The circle contains many of our Unitarian Universalist saints. I speak of the transcendentalists Emerson and Thoreau, of course, but also the pioneering feminists Margaret Fuller and Elizabeth Peabody, the fiery abolitionist Theodore Parker, and the utopian visionary George Ripley. What we see when we look closely at Emerson and Thoreau is not two staunch individualists, but rather two men caught in the tension between community and individuality, very conscious that one cannot exist without the other. Emerson wrote on friendship and in an essay declared, "I do not wish to treat friendship daintily, but with the roughest courage. When they are real, they are not glass threads or frostwork, but the solidest thing we know." Margaret Fuller's tragic death at 40, when she drowned at sea, prompted him to write, "I have lost my audience." Emerson thought that Fuller was the one person who understood his philosophy most completely, even if they sometimes violently disagreed. Of her, he wrote, "More variously gifted, wise, sportive, eloquent, magnificent, prophetic, reading my life at her will, and puzzling me with riddles." Of him, she wrote, that from him I first learned what is meant by an inward life, that the mind is its own place was a dead phrase to me till he cast light upon my mind. Perhaps Fuller's early death is why Emerson recalled Thoreau and not her in the fading moments of his life. But no matter. A close study of their circle reveals an essential truth. We require others to become ourselves. The tension between the individual and the community apparent in the writings of our transcendentalists leads to contradictory statements. Emerson himself put little stock in consistency, penning words that I sometimes take as my own slogan. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Let us consider Emerson the friend rather than Emerson the individualist this morning, if for no other reason that when Emerson was falling into his final solitude, he tried to steady himself with his memory of his great friend Thoreau. Emerson himself wrote, "Friendship demands a religious treatment." Have you ever had a good friend? A great friend? Can you recall what it felt like to be in that person's presence? Perhaps your friend is with you in the sanctuary this morning. Maybe you are sitting next to them, aware of the warmth of their body. Maybe they're distant, hacking corn stalks with a machete, sipping coffee in a Paris cafe, caking paint on a fresh stretched canvas, or driving through Boston's impossible streets. I invite you to invoke the presence of your friend. Give yourself to the quiet joy you feel when you are together. Friendship is an experience of connection. Friends remind us that we are not alone in the universe. We may be alone in the moment, seeking solitude or even isolated in pain, but we are always members of what William Ellery Channing called the great family of all souls. If we are wise, we learn that lesson through our friends. Again, Emerson, we walk alone in the world. Friends such as we desire are dreams and fables. Such dreams and fables can become real. They can become the solidest thing we know. Seeking such relationships is one reason why people join religious communities like this one. When I started in parish ministry, it took me a while to realize this. In the first congregation I served in Cleveland, Ohio, we had testimonials every Sunday. After the chalice was lit, a member of the congregation would get up and share why they had joined. Their stories were always somewhat similar, and for years I was slightly disappointed with them. The service would start, the flame would rise up, and someone would begin some variation of, "I come to this congregation because I love the community." That's it? My internal dialogue would begin. You come here because you love the community. You don't come seeking spiritual depth or because of all of the wonderful justice work we do in the world. Can't you get community someplace else? If you're looking for community, why don't you join a book club or find a sewing circle? We're a church. People are supposed to be here for more than just community. I must be a failure as a minister if all these people get out of this congregation is community. Eventually, I realized that community is an essential part of religious experience. The philosopher William James may have believed religion is the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude. But he was wrong. Religion is found in the moments of connection when we discover that we are part of something larger than ourselves. People, life together, life in community is a reminder of this reality. People seek out that experience in a congregation because of the isolating nature of modern life. In this country, we are more alone than ever before. Just a few years ago, Newsweek reported that in the previous 20 years, the number of people who have no close friends had tripled. Today, at least 1 out of every 4 people report having no one with whom they feel comfortable discussing an important matter. Congregations like this one offer the possibility of overcoming such a sense of isolation. We offer a place to celebrate life's passages and make meaning from those passages. Friendship requires a common center to blossom, and meaning-making is a pretty powerful center. Aristotle understood that friendship was rooted in mutual love. That love was not necessarily the love of friends for each other. It was love for a common object. This understanding led him to describe 3 kinds of friendship: those of utility, those of pleasure, and those of virtue, which he called complete friendship. Friendships of utility were the lowest, least valuable kind of friendship, and friendships of virtue were the highest kind. Erotic friendship fell somewhere in between. Friendships of utility were easily dissolved. As soon as one friend stopped being useful to the other, then the friendship dissipated. I was in my 20s when I learned the transitory nature of such friendships of utility. I spent several years between college and seminary living in San Francisco and working as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. For a year, I worked at an online bookstore. When a recession hit, there was a round of layoffs, and as a junior member of my department, I lost my job. Up until that point, I had spent a fair amount of social time with several of my colleagues. We would go out and have lunch together go out for lunch or have drinks together after work. I enjoyed the company of one colleague in particular. He had a master's degree in classical literature. Our water cooler conversations sometimes revolved around favorite authors from antiquity, Homer and Sappho. From his tongue flowed speech sweeter than honey, said one. Like a mountain whirlwind punishing the oak trees, love shattered my heart, said the other. Alas, when I lost my job, a common love of literature was not enough to sustain our relationship. My colleague was always busy whenever I suggested we get together. Have you ever had such a similar experience? Such friends come and go through our working lives. Far rarer are what Aristotle calls friendships of virtue. These are the enduring friendships. They help us to become better people. Congregational life provides an opportunity to build such friendships. The virtues might be understood as those qualities that shape a good and whole life. A partial list of Aristotle's virtues runs bravery, temperance, generosity, prudence. Friendship offers us the opportunity to practice these virtues, and in doing so, become better, more religious people. The virtues require a community in which to practice them. Let us think about bravery for a moment. The brave, Aristotle believed, stand firm in front of what is frightening, not with a foolhardy arrogance, but instead knowing full well the consequences of their decisions. They face their fears because they know that by doing so they may achieve some greater good. Seeking a friend is an act of bravery. The brave, Aristotle, it always contains within it the possibility of rejection. Emerson observed, "The only reward of virtue is virtue. The only way to have a friend is to be one." I have often found that when I hoped for friends, that I need to initiate the relationship. I need to start the friendship. Not the most naturally extroverted and outgoing person. Many days I am most content with the company of my books or wandering unescorted through the urban landscape, scanning riverbanks for blue herons and scouring wrinkled, aged trees for traces of mushrooms. But people contain within them possible universes that I cannot imagine. My human fellows pull me into my better self. And so I find that I must be brave and initiate friendships, even when I find the act of reaching out uncomfortable or frightening. Rejection is always a possibility. I was rejected by my former colleague, and rejection makes me question my own self-worth. When it comes, I wonder if I am perhaps unworthy of friendship or of love. But by being brave and trying again, I discover that I am. Bravery is not the only virtue we find in friendship. Generosity is there too, for friendship is the giving of the self to another. Through the giving of the self, we come to know ourselves a little better. We say, "I value this part of myself enough to want to share it with someone else." We could create a list of virtues and then explore how friendship offers an opportunity to practice each of them. Such an exercise, I fear, would soon prove tedious. So instead, let me underscore that our friends provide us the possibility of becoming better people. This can be true on even a trivial level. A friend visits, and I take the opportunity to make a vanilla souffle, something I've never done before, but will certainly do again. Together, we delight in its silky, sweet, eggy texture. It can also be true on a substantive level. A friend calls and reminds me that we should be working together to try to make the world a better place, to confront the injustices and the decline of democracy we see around us. I refocus my efforts on democratic practice. How have your friends changed your life? Emerson and Thoreau certainly changed each other's lives. And I know that the two men, whatever their preference for individualism, needed each other. I half suspect that Emerson's tattered memory of his friend, "What was the name of my best friend?" was actually an urgent cry. As Emerson disappeared into the dimming hollows of his mind, Thoreau's light was a signal that could call him back to himself. I detect a similar urgency in Elizabeth Bishop's poem to Marianne Moore. We can sit down and weep. We can go shopping or play at a game of constantly being wrong with a priceless set of vocabularies. Or we can bravely deplore, but please, please come flying. Whatever was going on in Bishop's life when she wrote her friend, the most pressing matter, the strongest tug of reality was that she see her friend. Surely it is an act of bravery to admit such a need. Truly it is an act of generosity to wish to give oneself so fully. Let us be brave, then, and seek out our friends. Such bravery can be as simple as saying, "Hello, I would like to get to know you." Let us be generous, then, and give ourselves to our friends, saying, "I have the greatest gift to give you, myself." Doing so will help us to become better, more virtuous people, and draw us to unexpected heights and into unexpected places. May it be so. Let the congregation say, Amen.